Hey y'all, welcome back to Dots and Beyond. I'm Beth. Today we're setting out my son's custom bullet journal for February. Yes, I said February. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to jump right in with sketching out the cover page, and we are continuing Kenny's themes of entities from the podcast, the Magnus Archives. This is Martin. More on him in a minute. This particular entity is known as the Lonely, one of the ancient and powerful entities that embodies a different aspect of fear. The Lonely represents isolation, solitude, and abandonment, preying on individuals by trapping them in loneliness and desolation. The Lonely manifests as an overwhelming sense of isolation and abandonment, often driving its victims to extreme measures to escape their solitude. It thrives on the despair and hopelessness of those trapped within its influence, feeding off of their emotions to grow stronger. Sidebar here as I use this white Posca pen on my stamps so that I can stamp white on this blackout paper. I don't have a white stamp pad, so this works perfectly well. I have also picked up the habit of using a Shakespearean quote at the beginning of each one of these setups for 2024. This one states, "Now I see the mystery of your loneliness," and that is from All's Well That Ends Well. Last month for the desolation, we discussed how each one of these entities has people, rituals, objects that it embodies or that are used to manifest it. And in the Lonely, the character here we have sketched on the cover is the character of Martin. He is brought in to the Magnus Archives as an employee, and he is a recurring character who initially was seen to be a victim of the Lonely, but he later becomes a vessel for the entity, embodying its characteristics and spreading its influence. Some of the images I have chosen to sketch out on these pages are just general images of loneliness, lonely people, or people that appear to be lonely. Some of the other things we're sketching in are directly related to the Magnus Archives, either people or objects that are mentioned, or even places that are mentioned within the podcast. One of the other recurring elements that I'm going to have throughout the journal, I've pretty much decided at this point, is the torn paper element. So we had the torn and burnt paper in January. Here I have a blackout paper that I have gilded in gold, and we'll continue some more torn paper for March as well. Martin is certainly not the only character within the Magnus Archives to fall prey to the Lonely. There are many others that do so as well, experiencing profound loneliness and isolation. Their experiences often serve as narratives within the larger story arcs that are carried throughout the show. It's easy to see why the producers of the Magnus Archives would choose the Lonely as one of its core entities of fear. The Lonely embodies the fear of being alone and abandoned, contrasting the importance of human connection and social interaction. It thrives on the negative emotions of its victims, amplifying feelings of despair and hopelessness to maintain its influence. And encounters with the Lonely often evoke existential questions about the nature of isolation and the human condition, exploring themes of mortality and insignificance. It truly is an exploration of one of humanity's deepest fears. On the left side of this spread, I have Kenny's finance tracker. It has places for him to put his checking and savings balances at the beginning and the end of the month. It also has an expense log for him to put in, as well as places for him to record his paydays, as well as add up his tips from being a barista at the end of each week. Occasionally throughout these monthly setups, you're going to find us stumble across what we're just going to call a special page that Kenny has asked me to add for that particular month to go along with that particular entity. And on the right, we have a page for his people. To illustrate this page, we're just going to use some tiny little people shapes, and we're going to start off by putting a little representation of Kenny directly in the middle, and all the way around the page we are going to draw people, and yet Kenny is still alone in the center, but we are going to give him a place where he can make a list of his people, those people that are your go-to people, your ride or die that you can always count on in your life. Of course, I don't know how many people Kenny truly has that are his quote people. I certainly hope that I am one of them. We only have a limited amount of space here, so I'm going to highlight 6 different rows where he can write in 6 names for his people. Moving on to the weekly setups for February, and I have used this design so many times now that I just went ahead and pre-put in the structure. It has a rolling weekly task list as well as a small area for each day for Kenny to write in any events. This allows us to fit 2 weeks on a single spread. Now for the design elements on this page, I drew a floating away astronaut on the left side. There is a story within the Magnus Archives of this astronaut floating through space, and can you think of anything else more lonely? And then on the right, we have the container ship, the Tundra, which is owned by the Lucas family. The Lucas family is known to perpetuate all of the rituals and everything to expand the loneliness throughout the Magnus Archives. Despite his propensity for loneliness, Martin does find his person in the Magnus Archives. And here I decided to draw 2 hands reaching towards one another where Martin and John are able to reach for one another. For the 5th week, I'm just going to draw some tea, which is Martin's beverage of choice. He always has a cup of tea in his hand. To be a little bit cheeky, I am going to put the symbol of an eye on this teacup because the eye, again, is another of the recurring themes throughout the Magnus Archives. And down in the bottom corner of Kenny's notes page, here I am going to put another eye shape. And within the iris of that eye, we're going to have Martin just sitting on a bench with his tea, pondering his life. Now, while we often find Martin and other victims of the lonely alone, there are other entities, namely the buried, the stranger, the web, the spiral. All of those are to come in later episodes for this journal that have people alone. They're not necessarily, though, tied specifically to the lonely entity as well. There is some overlap, but when an episode is mostly geared on the lonely, you definitely have that intense fear or even love of isolation or distance. On this last spread, we are going to focus on the Lucas family, the owners of that container ship, and a ritual they tried to pull off. Peter Lucas orchestrated a ritual for the lonely. He named it the Silence. He commissioned a tower block designed to isolate its inhabitants and fill it with people predisposed to loneliness. For the culmination of the ritual, he planned to lock them in and leave them to die. And that particular facility was a panopticon, which is based off of the real life, very creepy prison in London called Milkbank Prison. And this is where I've decided to put Kenny's playlist. I did not want to draw the panopticon. I made an attempt at it and decided very quickly that I was just going to print it and paste it in with sticker paper. Then here on the right, for the design element, I'm using the Lucas family crest to represent that whole family and their dedication to the lonely. This is a very simplified version of the Lucas family crest. I actually found it on a jewelry design website so that it could fit on a ring or a necklace, which is why it's so simplified. Made it much easier to recreate than some family crests that are out there. If you want to know whether Peter Lucas succeeded in his silence ritual, you're going to have to listen to the Magnus Archives and find out for yourself. For Kenny's February reflection prompts, we're keeping it fairly simple. At the top of the page, I'm writing in how was February, and we'll just put in some rulered lines so he can fill in exactly how he felt for the month. On the left side of the family crest, we have do less. And on the right side of the family crest, we have do more. And then at the bottom, I have just moments to remember so that he can put in some of his highlights for the month. One of the places almost impossible to illustrate for the lonely is a separate dimension that is absent of people except for any victims sent there. It is covered in fog. This dimension is usually accessed by the Lucas family, which they use for various purposes such as trapping others or to take themselves away from others. The lonely can also manifest randomly to trap its victims. And that concludes my son Kenny's custom creative bullet journal setup for February 2024, The Lonely by the Magnus Archives. This was filmed more than a month ago, but of course I didn't have the time to get into doing the voiceover. I am not going to wax poetic about all of those reasons. If you've been here for a minute, you know. If you don't know, you can go back and watch the January setup for this particular journal or any of my other videos. I can go ahead and tell you that our video for March in this creative journal setup, the theme is going to be the entity of the stranger. How is the stranger going to manifest as a primal fear? And there we close another chapter in the Magnus Archives. Now, if you're interested in the Magnus Archives, or if you had listened to it the first time, make sure you check out its sequel, which is now streaming where all of your podcasts can be found. Since I have moved my bullet journal into a Sterling Ink Common Planner and really simplified things for myself, I do love doing these setups for my son, and I'm looking forward to getting back on track. If you love this video, you know what to do. Please give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next one.